In the summer of 1964, something unsettling began appearing on American reconnaissance photographs. It wasn't dramatic at first, no explosions, no intercepted radio chatter, just a shape, long, sharp, unfamiliar, sitting quietly on a Soviet runway. To most people, it would have looked like another Cold War footnote. To US intelligence analysts, it felt like the beginning of a nightmare, because whatever that aircraft was, it was big, and it was built for speed. At the height of the Cold War, altitude meant safety. Speed meant survival. The United States believed it owned both. The U-2 spy plane cruised above 70,000 feet. The SR-71 Blackbird, still officially secret, was already flying higher and faster than any aircraft in history. American planners were confident. No enemy fighter could reach those heights. No missile could catch those speeds. Then, the Soviets proved them wrong. By 1965, radar operators along the Soviet periphery began tracking an aircraft that behaved unlike anything seen before. It climbed brutally fast. It leveled off above 75,000 feet, and once there, it accelerated past Mach 2, then kept going. US analysts watching from afar could barely believe the data. Some assumed it had to be a malfunction. Others thought it might be a rocket-assisted interceptor, but the tracks were consistent, repeated, deliberate. This was no test. This aircraft was operational. The CIA assigned it a name, Foxbat. What made Foxbat truly frightening wasn't just its speed or altitude. It was what it appeared to be designed to kill. In the early 1960s, the United States was still planning for massive nuclear bomber fleets. Aircraft like the B-58 Hustler and the proposed XB-70 Valkyrie were meant to penetrate Soviet airspace at extreme altitude and speed. Foxbat seemed purpose-built to stop them. Even worse, by 1966, US reconnaissance flights over the Middle East and Eastern Europe revealed another disturbing fact. Foxbat wasn't rare. It wasn't a fragile prototype hidden in a single test unit. It was appearing at multiple bases across the Soviet Union. The Pentagon began asking an uncomfortable question. What if the Soviets have leapfrogged us? Satellite imagery from the Corona program showed massive engines, enormous air intakes, and wings that suggested both speed and agility. Analysts concluded that the aircraft must be made largely of titanium. There was no other material strong enough to withstand sustained Mach 3 flight. That assumption alone sent shockwaves through American industry. At the time, the United States itself struggled to machine titanium efficiently, even for the SR-71. If the Soviets had solved that problem first, it meant something far more dangerous than a fast airplane. It meant a technological parity, or worse. By 1967, Foxbat's legend grew darker. American pilots flying reconnaissance missions near Soviet borders reported radar locks from extreme altitudes. On at least 2 occasions, SR-71 crews detected intercept attempts from aircraft climbing toward them at astonishing rates. The interceptors never got close, but the fact that they tried was deeply unsettling. One retired SR-71 pilot later recalled, "For the first time, we felt like someone was reaching for us." Inside the Pentagon, worst-case scenarios dominated every briefing. Intelligence estimates claimed Foxbat could outturn the F-4 Phantom, that it carried long-range missiles capable of killing bombers before they could respond, that it might even threaten the Blackbird itself. None of this was confirmed, but none of it could be disproven either. And so fear filled the gaps. In 1968, the mystery deepened when Soviet authorities allowed a controlled glimpse of the aircraft during rehearsals for the upcoming Domodedovo Air Parade near Moscow. Western observers watched in disbelief as Foxbats thundered overhead in formation, huge, fast, unapologetically industrial. This was not a slick showpiece. This was a weapon. One US defense attaché reportedly said they weren't hiding it. They were warning us. What American intelligence failed to realize, what no satellite photo could reveal, was that they were misreading the Soviet mindset entirely. US engineers designed aircraft to do many things well. Soviet engineers designed aircraft to do one thing perfectly. Foxbat was not meant to dogfight. It was not meant to escort bombers. It was built to climb higher, fly faster, and intercept targets no one else could touch. But that truth was still buried beneath layers of assumption. By the end of the 1960s, Foxbat had already changed American aviation. Without firing a single shot, the US Air Force quietly scrapped the idea of relying on speed alone for bomber survival. The XB-70 program was effectively dead, and behind closed doors, a new directive emerged. The United States needed a fighter that could dominate anything the Soviets might throw into the sky. That directive would give birth to the F-15 Eagle. Ironically, it was a plane designed to defeat an enemy that America did not yet understand. As the 1970s approached, Foxbat remained a ghost, visible, fast, terrifying, and profoundly misunderstood. And the longer the mystery lasted, the more dangerous it became, because in war, the most powerful weapon is not technology, it is belief. And the United States believed the MiG-25 was unbeatable. The belief hardened into doctrine. By 1969, inside the Pentagon and at Air Force headquarters, the MiG-25 was no longer treated as a theoretical threat. It was treated as a benchmark. Every new American aircraft project was quietly measured against a single question: can it survive Foxbat? That year, the Soviet Union made a calculated move. At the Domodedovo Air Show near Moscow, Western military observers were invited under tightly controlled conditions. For the first time, the MiG-25 was not a rumor, not a satellite silhouette, but a roaring presence in the sky. When it passed overhead, the sound alone was shocking, deep, violent, almost brutal. This was not the refined scream of a Western jet. It sounded like raw power forced into the air. The aircraft's size stunned the observers even more than its speed. It was enormous for a fighter. The engines were massive, the fuselage long and slab-sided, the wing short and swept. Many observers assumed they were looking at a heavy interceptor designed for sustained maneuvering at extreme altitude. Few questioned whether such a machine could actually turn well. In the logic of Western design, size implied capability. American intelligence reports that followed the air show painted an alarming picture. Analysts concluded that the MiG-25's radar must be extraordinarily advanced to operate at such altitudes and speeds. Some estimates suggested detection ranges rivaling or exceeding those of American interceptors. The Foxbat was now believed capable of guiding long-range missiles with devastating precision. Behind closed doors, fear quietly replaced skepticism. At the same time, a dangerous misinterpretation took hold. US analysts assumed the Soviets shared the same priorities: flexibility, maneuverability, pilot-centric avionics. They believed Foxbat was meant to fight American fighters on equal terms, only faster and higher. That assumption shaped everything that followed. In 1970, the US Air Force accelerated what would become the FX program, later known as the F-15 Eagle. The requirements were blunt and uncompromising. It had to climb faster than the MiG-25. It had to see first, shoot first, and survive beyond visual range. Most importantly, it had to win decisively in air-to-air combat against an aircraft believed to be the pinnacle of Soviet engineering. Engineers were given unprecedented freedom and unprecedented pressure. The F-15 was designed around raw performance: twin engines with enormous thrust, a radar powerful enough to track targets at extreme distances, and a structure built for sustained high-G maneuvering. Weight limits were pushed. Cost became secondary. One internal Air Force memo famously stated that the new fighter must be not merely superior but overwhelming. Foxbat had done what decades of intelligence briefings could not. It had unified American aviation around a single fear. Meanwhile, the MiG-25 continued to fly, and its operational record grew quietly but steadily. Throughout the early 1970s, Foxbats routinely intercepted US reconnaissance aircraft near Soviet airspace. They did not fire. They did not need to. Their presence alone was a message: we can reach you. In the Middle East, Soviets supplied MiG-25s flew reconnaissance missions over Israel at altitudes that rendered existing interceptors useless. Israeli pilots reported tracking contacts they could not climb to, could not lock onto, and could not threaten. Surface-to-air missiles failed as well. The aircraft was simply too high, too fast. These encounters made their way back to Washington and intensified the alarm. Yet, even as fear grew, contradictions began to surface. Despite its speed, the MiG-25 rarely maneuvered aggressively. It avoided prolonged engagements. It climbed, sprinted, and disengaged. Some analysts noticed that Foxbat pilots treated speed like a limited resource, something to be used carefully, not casually. Those details were often dismissed. The dominant narrative was already set. The MiG-25 represented a technological leap, and the United States was racing to catch up. Congressional hearings echoed with concern over a fighter gap. Defense budgets swelled. Entire generations of pilots were trained under the assumption that one day they would face Foxbat in combat. What no one in the West fully understood was that the Soviets were not trying to build a perfect fighter. They were trying to build a solution to a specific American problem: high-altitude, high-speed intruders. The MiG-25 was never meant to be elegant. It was meant to be relentless. By the mid-1970s, the aircraft had become a symbol rather than a machine, a symbol of Soviet reach, of American vulnerability, of a future aerial battlefield that looked terrifyingly uncertain. And then, in September of 1976, that symbol crossed an invisible line. A MiG-25 did something no one believed possible. It defected, and with it, the truth. On the morning of September 6, 1976, the Cold War cracked open, not with an explosion, but with a landing. At 1:11 p.m. local time, air traffic controllers at Hakodate Airport in northern Japan saw something they were not prepared for. A massive unfamiliar jet came screaming out of the clouds, low on fuel, fast, and completely unannounced. It crossed the runway threshold at terrifying speed, deployed its parachute late, and barely stopped before the pavement ran out. Painted on its fuselage were red Soviet stars. It was a MiG-25. The pilot was Viktor Ivanovich Belenko, a 29-year-old Soviet Air Defense Forces lieutenant. In that moment, he became the most valuable defector of the Cold War. For American intelligence, this was the impossible gift. For 10 years, the MiG-25 had been studied from a distance, through grainy satellite photos, radar returns, and fearful assumptions. Now, it sat intact on the ground of a US ally. For the first time, the United States could touch the Foxbat. Within hours, the Japanese government quietly alerted Washington. By nightfall, US intelligence teams were en route. What followed was one of the most secretive and intense technical examinations in aviation history. The aircraft was moved into a hangar, sealed from public view. Every panel, every rivet, every wire was photographed, catalogued, and measured. Engineers expected to find miracles. They found something else. The first shock came almost immediately. The MiG-25 was not built from titanium. Nearly 80% of its structure was stainless steel, welded rather than riveted. It was heavy, crude by Western standards, but incredibly strong. Then came the electronics. Inside the cockpit and avionics base, American engineers discovered vacuum tubes, technology the United States had largely abandoned years earlier. The radar, while powerful, was analog, brute force in design, resistant to electromagnetic interference and nuclear effects, but lacking the finesse of American systems. One US engineer later recalled, "It was like opening a time capsule from the 1950s, except it worked at Mach 3. The MiG-25's engines revealed another surprise. They were enormous, yes, but optimized for short bursts of extreme speed, not sustained performance. At speeds above Mach 2.8, engine life dropped dramatically. Pushing to Mach 3 was possible, but costly. Each flight at that speed damaged the engines, sometimes irreversibly. The legend of unlimited performance collapsed. Even more startling was the truth about maneuverability. The MiG-25 could not dogfight. Its wings were designed for stability at high speed, not agility. At lower altitudes, it bled energy quickly. In close combat, it would have been outmatched by American fighters. And yet, none of this made the MiG-25 a failure, because its mission had never been misunderstood in Moscow. The Foxbat was not a duelist. It was a guardian, a high-altitude interceptor built to sprint upward, launch massive missiles, and force intruders away. Its radar could detect targets from extreme distances. Its missiles carried warheads designed to destroy bombers in a single hit. Against its intended prey, it was devastating. Belenko's defection also revealed something more human and more tragic. He described long hours, poor living conditions, and deep disillusionment with the Soviet system. He had chosen Japan not for politics alone, but because it was the closest place he believed he could survive the landing. The Soviet reaction was immediate and furious. Demands were made. Accusations flew. The aircraft was eventually dismantled, shipped back in crates, and returned to the USSR after the Americans were finished with it. By then, the damage was irreversible. The myth was gone. The MiG-25 was no longer a monster hiding in the clouds. It was understood. And in that understanding came a deeper realization. The United States had been wrong, but wrong in a way that changed everything. The Foxbat had not been a technological miracle. It had been a doctrinal one, and that realization would echo through every American fighter that followed. Understanding the MiG-25 did not bring relief. It brought clarity, and with it, consequences that would shape American aviation for the rest of the Cold War and far beyond. When US engineers and intelligence officers finished their analysis of the Foxbat, one truth stood above all others. The aircraft had done exactly what it was designed to do. Not more, not less. The danger had never been the airplane itself, but the assumptions wrapped around it. For more than a decade, the United States had fought a phantom version of the MiG-25, one imagined through the lens of Western engineering philosophy. That phantom had reshaped an entire generation of aircraft. By the time Viktor Belenko defected in 1976, it was already too late to undo those changes. The F-15 Eagle was flying, and it was everything the US Air Force had demanded in response to Foxbat. The Eagle climbed faster than the MiG-25. It maneuvered in ways the Foxbat never could. Its radar and missiles were designed not just to intercept but to dominate. What followed was one of the most ironic outcomes in military history. An aircraft created to counter an overestimated threat became the most successful air superiority fighter ever built. In combat, the F-15 achieved an unmatched record, over 100 aerial victories without a single loss. It never fought the MiG-25 directly, but it defeated the fear that Foxbat had created. The influence of the MiG-25 reached even further. American intelligence methodology changed. Analysts were trained to question assumptions, to study adversary doctrine, rather than mirror image design logic. The belief that the technological sophistication always equals superiority was permanently shaken. Soviet engineers, it turned out, valued robustness, survivability, and single mission effectiveness over elegance. This lesson reshaped threat assessment during the late Cold War. When aircraft like the MiG-29 and Su-27 appeared, the United States responded with deeper analysis and less panic. The ghost of Foxbat was still there, reminding planners of the cost of misunderstanding an opponent. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union drew its own conclusions. The MiG-25 evolved into the MiG-31, a true next-generation interceptor. Faster, smarter, and equipped with a phased array radar, it became the backbone of Soviet and later Russian air defense. Unlike Foxbat, the MiG-31 could coordinate with other aircraft, track multiple targets, and patrol enormous stretches of airspace. Its lineage was direct. Without the MiG-25, it would not exist. And the mission remained the same: defend the sky at any cost. Perhaps the most profound legacy of the MiG-25 lies not in metal or speed, but in psychology. For years, American pilots trained under the belief that somewhere above them flew an enemy aircraft that could outclimb, outrun, and outgun anything they had. That belief sharpened training, justified budgets, and pushed innovation faster than peacetime logic ever would. The MiG-25 never fired a shot at the United States. It never shot down an American aircraft. Yet, it reshaped American air power more than many planes that did. In hindsight, the Foxbat stands as a reminder of a uniquely Cold War truth. Fear does not require violence to be effective. It only requires uncertainty. A silhouette on a satellite image. A radar track that defies expectation. A question that cannot be answered. For American aviation, the MiG-25 was that question. It forced the United States to ask whether its assumptions were correct, whether its dominance was real, and whether its enemies might think differently, and therefore fight differently. In answering those questions, the United States built aircraft that would dominate the skies for decades. The Foxbat did not win battles, it did not win wars, but it changed the rules of the game. And in the quiet aftermath of that change, long after the Cold War faded into history, one truth remains undeniable. Sometimes the most powerful weapon an adversary can deploy is not a missile, or a bomb, or even an airplane, but the fear of what that airplane might be. That was the true legacy of the MiG-25,